Good morning, everyone. We are beginning to funnel everyone into the webinar today. So as we are funneling in, I will kick us off. Welcome to DonorConnect, Collective Vision for Resilient and Strong DSM. The reason we host DonorConnects at the Community Foundation is a main part of our mission. It's to connect donors to causes that you care about. And thank you for being a part of today's discussion. We've been reflecting on the past year, and today our panel of community leaders will share some inspirations from their perspective of the last year, as well as some wisdoms from the learning opportunities that they found this year too. There were so many obstacles in 2020, but what remained constant was our commitment to addressing each hurdle with the belief that we are better together. Now I'd like to introduce our fearless leader and president of the Community Foundation, Christy Knaus. And as a reminder, you can post questions in the Q&A chat feature, and we will get to those towards the end. Thank you so much. Christy?
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today and for your ongoing support of our community. Just over a year ago, our world turned upside down and our day-to-day routines changed drastically as we sought to keep one another safe and grapple with our new normal. And we immediately saw needs arising in our community. Many of the issues that have long existed in our community had a spotlight shone on them. Many individuals and families that had not previously needed support were now struggling, and many of you stood ready to rise to the occasion by once again offering your support. In those early days of the pandemic, I was often asked how I thought our community would respond to the almost paralyzing challenges we were faced with. The answer came easily. Our community was far from paralyzed. Thanks to the trusting relationships, the commitment to planning, and a shared vision of the importance of generosity, I could confidently say we were made for times like these. Times where our neighbors required assistance to stay healthy and housed, times when our young people needed support to navigate education outside of the typical classroom, times when the marquees of our arts and cultural organizations were dark, but the light of creativity in our community continued to shine brightly, times when our community needed us. We held a similar panel to the one gathered today exactly a year ago, and we thought it would be beneficial to pull back together for a time of reflection and a time of inspiration. The panel is just that, a group of inspiring leaders who haven't taken a breath in over a year as they've led their respective organizations and communities. They've joined together in partnership to lead Greater Des Moines through a pandemic, racial unrest, and an unprecedented election cycle. This is an incredible group of leaders who also call one another friend, which I believe is truly our community's secret sauce that sets our trajectory toward resilience and continued success at full throttle ahead. With that, I'd like to introduce today's panel. Elizabeth Buck is United Way of Central Iowa president and serves as the chair for the human capital work of Capital Crossroads, our vision plan for Greater Des Moines. Elizabeth and her team quickly expanded and deployed the 211 call system as a lifeline to our community throughout the pandemic, and now into recovery by leading the effort to connect our community to those important vaccinations. Elizabeth has her finger on the pulse of the ebbs and flows of the needs of the most vulnerable in our community, and we're so grateful for her ongoing leadership. Renee Hardman is the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Iowa and also made history as the first elected African-American councilwoman in West Des Moines. And as we were seeking leadership to guide our community through a process to address racial equity and set a vision for addressing this critical issue in our community, Renee was the first person we thought of, and she agreed to serve as a tri-chair for the DSM for Equity Collective. Renee's voice and tireless work and advocacy in our community has and is changing the face and landscape, and we're so pleased she has agreed to join us today. Jay Byers is the Greater Des Moines Partnership President and CEO and serves as a co-chair for Capital Crossroads. Jay and his team at the partnership have led efforts to keep our community informed of the effects of the COVID pandemic on our economic development, workforce, and business community. They've helped businesses navigate staying open and have continued to promote our vibrant downtown. Jay has a robust vision that continues to help our community achieve success well above our weight class. And Sally Dix is the Executive Director of Bravo Greater Des Moines and serves as the chair of the Cultural Capital element of Capital Crossroads. Bravo serves as our Regional Arts Council and is best known for their grant making to our region's arts and cultural organizations, but Bravo also provides critical leadership at the intersection of arts and culture with all of our shared regional priorities. Sally and Bravo have been instrumental in supporting the arts and culture sector through the pandemic and will continue to advocate to ensure the arts continue to thrive into the future. So friends, thank you for being here today. We're grateful for your time and all you're doing to help us achieve resiliency in the community we love. I've prepared some questions to get our conversation going, but I do hope you'll feel free to keep yourself off mute and ask questions of each other, interject or add in where appropriate, and feel free to make our time together conversational. And to our audience, we will have time for your questions as well. So please feel free to use the chat feature and share your questions, and we'll get through as many as we're able to in our time together. So last year, we set the stage for our discussion by giving us a state of the state status report on your respective sectors. And I think it's appropriate to revisit that and better understand from your perspectives where our community stands. Last year, we were focused on the pandemic specifically, but oh, so much has happened since then. So knowing now how 2020 and thus far in 2021 has played out, could each of you give your perspective on the current status of the sector you represent? And Elizabeth, we'll get started with you.
Great, thank you so much for this opportunity, and wow, what a year we've all experienced. I guess I'm going to share just a little bit of my perspective on where we are and what we've been through during this year. And I think Christy highlighted one of the frameworks or one of the issues that our sector has faced, and that has just been the rise in the number of Central Iowa households who were newly needy due to this pandemic. And it really, we saw so many individuals and families who struggled to really navigate the resources that they've never had to access before. Things like unemployment and food assistance were really new to so many. And that's one of the wonderful resources and one of the wonderful ways that 211 has been able to help support so many in our community. But we really saw that our really already strapped nonprofit sector had to pivot and operate in overcapacity for some of our nonprofits and really get creative in so many ways to operate their programs or to change their programs in so many new ways. We also saw just some amazing collaboration that occurred. You know, one example that we've seen this year is, you know, like Courage League Sports and Opportunity on Deck coming together to collaborate and combine their efforts. And I know that we'll see more collaborations like that in the months that come forward. But really, when we looked at some data from the nonprofit sector and some research that was done, we saw that 83% of the nonprofits here in Central Iowa had financial challenges, which included, you know, decreased or uncertainty in their donations, you know, unable to have events, lots of different reasons why financial challenges were so prevalent. But we also saw so many of our nonprofits who had increased demand for services, you know, the food assistance programs, just so many different programs that were operating above capacity. And we saw that 81% of the respondents of our nonprofit sector were operating at 100% capacity or above. And you think about how much toll that took on those organizations, you know, due to extra staffing and just the pressures and the stresses of the pandemic, and not only for them as a working nonprofit, but for them in their personal lives. But we did see that there were some that had decreased demands for services and loss of revenue. Many of them had to lay off staff, and you know, we don't really have see the full picture of that yet, but we will in the months that come ahead. But I think we knew at United Way, and we pivoted pretty quickly, that our nonprofits would need us more than ever. And so we quickly invested additional funds and really gave our nonprofits additional flexibility during this time. By the end of this year, we will have put out an additional 1.8 million into the sector this year.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've got three funders on this panel, and that is one observation that I would have, is how quickly the funding community came together to say, how can we adapt and make things as easy as possible, flexible as possible, and yet and really get that critical assistance out as it's needed and when it's needed in our community. So thank you for your leadership on that, Elizabeth. Any other comments from you before I move on for this one? Okay, great. I'm going alpha here on this one. So Jay, I'm going to move to you next, and really interested in your perspective here.
Well, thanks, Christy. Thanks for including the partnership as part of this panel, and great job to you and your team and the entire Community Foundation for your leadership throughout, you know, very challenging time for our region. Yes. And I'll say that to the rest of the panelists too, with Renee and Elizabeth and Sally, just some tremendous leadership out of all of you and your organizations, and feel very lucky and blessed to be part of this community over the past year, and as we reflect not only on what that year looked like, but what it looks like moving forward and the exciting opportunities that we all have. You know, I guess I'll just start, Christy, by saying, you know, going into the pandemic, I think our region was in a position of strength, right? And you know, in terms of over the past decade, have outperformed, you know, our Midwest peers in terms of, you know, percentage of population growth and GDP growth, job growth, all these tremendous rankings, all these great projects moving forward through Capital Crossroads. And so again, I think we came into the pandemic with a position of strength, and I think all of us, as we look across the region, are very amazed as we look back in terms of the pivots that were made in our region, and to really deal with some very, very challenging situations, and definitely, you know, some industries fared better than others, or a lot of pockets of pain. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of the disparities got worse. We know that there's a lot of things that, you know, in terms of, you know, education attainment and a lot of things that we need to work on. But that being said, I think as we look forward, there's a lot to be excited about, right? One of the things that really stuck out with me last year, and I know many of you were part of that conversation as well too. You know, there are so many big projects that continue to move forward. And James Chung, who we invited to do a presentation with a lot of us who are on this call, you know, I had posted something on LinkedIn, and he had responded. I think it was about the skate park. And he says, well, we'd had him come before, and he said, well, you know, our research showed that coming out of the last recession, that one of the things that set Greater Des Moines apart, DSM USA apart, was that it continued to invest in itself, right? And if you look at all the amazing projects that are moving forward right now and plowed right through a very tough time, right? And I'll just mention some of them, because I would make the case that there's no other region our size, or quite frankly, I'm not sure of any other region in the country that has the level of projects moving forward that we have right now. So Florida's Skate Park, Central Iowa Water Trails, USL Pro Iowa Soccer Stadium, Des Moines International Transload Facility, the Merle Hay Project with the Bucks Arena, the Drake Stadium, the Recplex, on and on and on, right? These are incredible projects that are all kind of going on at the same time. It's very much like, for those of us who were around when the Major Projects Task Force was moving forward, but it was maybe not as top down, but again, just some tremendous projects that are moving forward. And as we look at sort of post-pandemic world, placemaking has never, ever been more important than it is right now, right? With the remote workers, people can, in so many professions now, can live anywhere and work anywhere. And to really focus on placemaking with projects like I just mentioned, but it's more than that too. It's about, what does our education system look like? What does public safety look like? What does our healthcare system look like, right? Because again, it's more important than ever that we focus on placemaking. I think that again, we've done a great job with that as a region, but again, there's a lot of other things that we need to continue to do. And I think that, you know, as we look at these sort of rankings, and whenever I sort of talk about, you know, these rankings, I never really say, you know, is it about one specific ranking, or are you number 1 or are you number 10? But it's, you could continue to show up on rankings with other regions that you want to be associated with and compare yourselves to, and that's definitely been the case. So a number of rankings that have showed that DSM USA is well positioned for the future. One of the most recent ones today, the Today Show recognized DSM USA as one of the top 10 places for residents to move post-pandemic. But if you look at some of those other cities that are on there, it's places like Nashville, it's Boston, it's Raleigh, it's Des Moines. I think we were the only Midwest city that was even on that list. But multiple other rankings as well. And so again, I'm very excited about the future. Just within the partnerships sort of work plan too, one of our big things is recruiting companies to move here and helping companies expand. And our project prospect list is very robust right now. We've got a lot of projects in the works. We've had some nice announcements. So I think that that's very promising as well too. But again, I think one of those things to really focus on moving forward is that sort of expansive view of placemaking and how do we sort of double down on those investments, because it's going to be absolutely critically important for the ongoing success of our region.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. I have to think about that position of strength and the many years, many hours that we've put into planning. And if you look at Capital Crossroads and the way that we've come together around that and collaborated and built partnership and relationship around that plan, I have to think that that also helped us position us in a place of strength going into the pandemic. And even little things like, which aren't little, but pulling people together to have a disaster recovery network in place. So when the time came, we could deploy like that, or having a central Iowa funders forum that meets monthly. So funders know each other and come together very quickly and talk about strategy to assist the nonprofit sector. I'd also say there was just a study that was released today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, giving 5 reasons nonprofits should feel optimistic about the future. So, I think that there are things that we can hold on to that really do inspire resilience and positive thinking moving forward. Sally, let's turn to you. I'm anxious to get an update on how things are going with the arts and cultural sector.
Good morning, Christy. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the cultural sector with this panel today. And normally I don't like to follow Jay Byers because he's such a tough act to follow, but I think you teed it up perfectly by talking about placemaking. Because I think there's a lot of aspects to placemaking, but I think one of the most important is the arts and culture scene and what we have to offer in terms of both quality of life with respect to the sector Bravo supports and the economic impact of the cultural sector. So a year ago, the data were real bad. There was no sector in the nation. There was no sector that was hit harder between February and April of 2020 than the leisure and hospitality industry, which includes museums and cultural experiences. Most of the, if you look at the data, most of the sectors within that, most of the industries within that sector lost more than 50% of their workforce in the first 3 months of the pandemic. I'm pleased to say that some of that is starting to come back. We're starting to see some venues starting to reopen, particularly those that have outdoor spaces or that allow people the opportunity to spread out. So that's really exciting, and there's high demand. In conversations with cultural leaders in our community, we're seeing high demand and appetite for experiences. One of the great things about arts and culture is that it's like you want to experience it with other people. And certainly there's been a ton of things that people could do at home, but there's an eagerness to get back together and build community in these shared spaces and with these shared experiences. So that's exciting. I have to be clear, though, that it's hard to answer on behalf of the whole sector because there are some businesses and some that are going to struggle, and it's going to take longer. It's not a light switch. It's really important for people to understand that just because we can open or just because the community is 80% vaccinated, there's going to be a long on-ramp for some of these organizations to come back. If you think about just the production of a theater performance, first of all, you have to get the okay to open up again. Then you have to pick a show. Then you have to get actors to rehearse for that show. Then you have to sell the tickets. Then you have to get the audiences in there. There's a long lead time. It doesn't just happen in a minute. So we're going to have to be patient with these cultural organizations as they get back up and running and bring live performances back together. I think it's also important to note that there are kind of 2 aspects to the cultural sector. There is for sure the nonprofit sector, which is kind of majority of what Bravo supports and what we're talking about here today. I think it's also really important, though, that we recognize the individual artists that may not be represented through the nonprofit organizations. This is a little outside of Bravo's scope. We certainly are grateful for the the commitment that the individual artists and the contributions they make to the economy. It's just not exactly in our wheelhouse. But I do want to make sure that this community understands the value of individual artists to the creative economy and how critically important it is that we continue to nurture and cultivate those individuals as well, many of whom are still really struggling from loss of income.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. And Renee, really interested in your perspective, because as Elizabeth talked about nonprofits that needed to pivot immediately, you experienced that firsthand, right?
Right.
Other areas that you lead, you wear so many hats. So thanks for being here. I look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you. And it's really a pleasure to share this platform with so many folks that I am friends with and admire and respect. And, you know, I'm going to wear a couple of hats here. My first hat is the one of leading a nonprofit that primarily works in the space of youth development. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is the way in which many nonprofits across the nonprofit sector really, really dug in and leaned into the pandemic than leaning away from it. Mm-hmm. And so while I could talk about all the things that Big Brothers Big Sisters did to help with this digital equity divide and the learning gap and being there for our youth at a time of such great uncertainty, what makes me proud as a nonprofit leader is that we showed the world that it's the nonprofits that are really diving in there, being a part of the solution. You know, we helped families stay in their homes. We dealt with food insecurity. We kept kids in school and still excited about school, even when they didn't know much about virtual learning, and mental health issues and joblessness issues. It's the work of so many of my peers in this space that created avenues for us to really get through the pandemic on the other side and still thrive. And so just really proud that I was here during a time of most challenge, but here sharing this space with so many nonprofits that really got this community through this pandemic. The other thing the other perspective I want to share is that we had a crisis and a crisis and a crisis last year. We had the DonorConnect, we had the health pandemic, and we had what I consider a pandemic on humanity. And I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity on this panel to share with you that in last year, two individuals that are 23 years apart, one's 23 and one was 46. Both of them changed the world in two different ways. One changed the world through his senseless death, and one changed the world based on her hope and vision and her poetic words. Both dealing with what I consider social unrest and injustice in this world, that even that part, and I consider that a pandemic. It was huge. And I think if anyone wasn't affected by it, you've been living under a barn. Yeah. And so here, through both of these individuals, one tragic, one hopeful, the intersection where I see them both is that there's hope and endurance and hopefully a movement toward greater humanity and more empathy about others and how we live in this world, but yet a common understanding of how we can reveal that we experience this world in different ways. And I know we'll have questions that address that, but I just wanted to open up to say, yes, that we are resilient, we work together, we had great things that came from this pandemic. We learned that we will still stand regardless. But another side of what happened last year that builds resiliency is this trying to understand how we're going to navigate still in a world that has a lot of uncertainties around inequities. Mm-hmm. We have to address that. We have to not be silent to it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, you know, I think we will get to that in this next question a little bit too, kind of what our hopes are moving forward. So as the clouds are parting here and we look ahead to resilience and creating a better normal in Greater Des Moines, let's pivot to that. I'm really interested in hearing from you all. What are the top 1, 2, or 3 things, quickly, obviously, that you believe we can embrace to address our most pressing challenges or promising opportunities to move our community forward. So Jay, even as you talked about, placemaking and a focus on that, what are the things that we can really grab a hold of now to help move that forward? And so I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. And I said your name, so I'll start with you, Jay.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start with sort of the I'll go back to that list of placemaking things, right? I think that, we need to continue to lean in to get these projects across the finish line, right? I think these are all game changers for us. Again, Florida Skate Park, that's going to be opening the USL Pro Iowa Stadium, Central Iowa Water Trails, on and on and on. Again, I think these are types of assets that really set us apart. But I think in terms of, one of the things, Christy, you've heard me talk about, and you had mentioned, secret sauce. There's sort of, I always say it's sort of public-private partnerships, regionalism, visioning, and leadership. And I think that 2020 has changed how I've looked at all those too, right? And so I guess starting with sort of public-private partnerships, this region has done a really great job of public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector coming together. Not asking if you're a Democrat or Republican, or, we work on projects all the time, but I think as we look at PPPs moving forward, that I think that gets harder and harder too, right? Because I think that there's this level of civility and various political sides working together. I think that's going to be more important than ever that we model that in terms of, working with, people like Scott Racker at the Race Center and others, but we need to continue to figure out how public-private nonprofits can continue to be successful moving forward. It's been really important for us, and we need to model the way. And when I look at regionalism too, the big divide with urban and rural, right? Not just in Iowa, but across the country, and we need to model how can we listen to each other? How can we work closer together? And the partnership covers 10 counties, so we have a lot of rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas. But again, how can we model that here in our region and for the rest of the country? And then visioning, right? We've done a great job with Capital Crossroads every 5 years, but what 2020 showed us is that we had to develop a lot of strategies as, building the plane as it's flying, right? And so I think it's also how do we sort of take advantage of opportunities without necessarily having to be in a 5-year plan. At the same time, how do we keep that visioning moving forward, but how do we be more flexible in terms of identifying those projects and advancing? And then leadership has changed too in so many ways, right? We already knew that a lot of the leaders in this community over the past decade have retired and maybe stepped back, and how do you engage that next generation? But one of the big lessons I think for 2020 that we should have been in front of before this, and Renee touched on this, is that inclusive leadership, right? It needs to be a much broader group of leaders that we are embracing and that we're bringing into the fold and help us to determine the future of our region, right? So it is a generational thing, and it's definitely a DEI strategy as well too. So that's sort of how I think, my sort of view of the secret sauce has changed, and how we need to look at it moving forward.
That's great. Thanks, Jay. And I think too, just with that inclusive leadership, being much more intentional about it as a community. So, Renee, would you like to go?
Yeah, and I, Jay, I really appreciate a lot of the great things that you're saying. And, another hat I wear is West Des Moines City Councilwoman, as you mentioned, and, the quality of life initiatives and amenities and regionalization issues are really critical for all of our municipalities, where we are greater together, better together, bigger together, all of those things. So I echo those sentiments. And I will just supplement a little bit more on what you've just said about the way in which we look at the D&I equity space. I think that 2020 shared a light that there's a lot of people that were asleep and sleeping. I'm just going to call it what I feel. This is not, I'm angry or anything of that nature. I'm just sharing my perspective as it relates to it awoken a lot of people from their sleeping to say, what have I done in this space to move the needle on what we all want for this community, and that it be a welcoming place for all. And so I think we kind of walked in this journey that it was a welcoming place, and it is a welcoming place, but is it for all? And how do we bridge a gap for those that feel that they are not further along this journey? So I appreciate that, this community, there are over 150 people, leaders like yourself, Jay, and others that signed an equity pledge. And my hope is that, it was a signature that meant action. It was a signature that meant bold steps. It was a signature that meant challenging status quo and no longer being the guardian of status quo and saying, how can I dive into this space and at times become uncomfortable, but yet learn things that will move this needle on where this community wants to go, and I think has the heart to go, but yet the fortitude that's going to propel it forward. So I sit in this space hopeful. I sit in this space that there are more people rallying around this issue than ever before. You look at all of the companies that are opening up their doors to diversity, equity, and inclusion officers. I think there's plenty of them, which is great. So I think collectively they're going to be changing the mindsets of their organizations, looking at metrics that move that needle, because that's really what people want to see. We can talk this talk and walk it every day. And we can, hang up our signs that we're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, but it's really the perceptions of how people feel they can navigate throughout these communities that will help move the needle in this space.
I'm feeling hopeful too. Renee and Jay and I are part of this DSM for Equity Collective. And we've just had a couple of meetings now to organize ourselves, but you leave those meetings feeling very hopeful about what we can do if we come together. And just for the audience too, it's really looking at bringing in someone to facilitate this conversation in our community, but come together around both a vision, but some concrete action items and metrics that you spoke of, Renee, too. So just a little update on what that is. But.
And, Christy, and I think it's about what do others looking outside of Iowa see us as, what hear about us? What do they hear about some of the things that are going into the legislature that have impact on how people really view Iowa? I mean, I think we can't put blinders on and feel like our perspective is the only perspective and we can tout our success. It's the perception of what other people see and feel and hear as well that I think will help us move the needle a bit further along.
Absolutely. I think, we saw that this legislative session, maybe even more than many. And there were some comments in the chat related to that. Like, what are our organizations doing to address that? How are we encouraging pushback on that at the legislative level? So that might be something we can get to a little more here, but certainly recognizes it as a community. If we want to be that draw, then that can't happen because we need to be welcoming to all.
Right.
Sally, I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. What do you think we can get our arms around and embrace moving forward?
Yeah, one of the greatest sort of takeaways for me is that it really is going to take every sector to move forward. And both Jay and Renee have touched on this in terms of public-private partnerships and all of the issues and opportunities, but it's really going to take everyone. And I say sometimes there's no more low-hanging fruit for our community. We've got big opportunities ahead of us, but it's going to take big solutions. And so I really like the word intersectionality and the opportunity for cross-sector solutions and working together. So that's one of the things that I think our community has seen over the last year and even before the pandemic, but I think that's a great opportunity for us. And then I also think there's space for fresh perspectives, right? And we've seen a lot of success in not doing things the way we've always done them. And that's not to say that the way we've always done them has necessarily been bad. It's just to say that new voices and new opportunities and turning things on their head there have been some upsides too, to seeing things differently. And I think if we're intentional about productive disruptive thinking, if you can string those three words together, productive disruptive thinking, I think it can be really beneficial for our community moving forward.
Very good. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll keep it kind of brief, but the two things that I would focus on that I think we learned to embrace during this year. First of all, I think there is a greater understanding, I'm hopeful there's a greater understanding that right now we do not have equal opportunity for all to thrive in our community. And until we all believe that, know that in our hearts and in our minds, we cannot move this community forward. Because it is, if you look at the equity gaps on any issue that United Way is working on, education, health, essential needs, all of them have enormous equity gaps based either on race or financial strength of families. And we've all as a community have made great progress on so many things. But I think one of the things that the racial unrest and the heightened awareness, I hope, has brought to the forefront of all of us in our leadership positions, either in our companies, nonprofits, religious community, everyone, is that there are not equal opportunities for all. So that's one of the first things. The second thing for me is I believe and I feel in my heart that we have a greater sense of collaboration across sectors. And I think about just an amazing event that happened this last weekend. We're hopefully getting to a point where there will be enough vaccinations for everyone, but there will still be members of our community for lots of different reasons who won't have the same access to these shots through technology challenges, through transportation, through trust. Lots of different reasons. And this Saturday, I've been able to go to a lot of amazing events in my career, but this Saturday was one of the most moving, exciting events that I've been able to participate in. And United Way with 30 other organizations came together at Corinthian Baptist Church for a day, and we vaccinated nearly 1,200 people. 62% were individuals of color. And it was successful because we all put aside our power or whatever it was, and we came together and held hands and brought that event, and many more like this are going to be necessary in the next few months if we really want to move this community to a herd immunity. So I saw collaboration that I hadn't seen before in an event like the one that was happened on Saturday, Corinthian.
And Elizabeth, if I can say, I want to thank you and all the organizations that really partnered together. I was there as well. I think I was the first one to get my vaccine. I got an early morning appointment. And what I saw is what you just said, is organizations all working together for the common good of trying to help people have access to saving their lives. And so I applaud you and the many other organizations that participated in that. But what I also want to applaud you for, Elizabeth, is using your voice to acknowledge that there are inequities in the way in which we navigate this world, in education and healthcare and opportunities and all kinds of housing. And until we can get and move and take bold steps to address those through the work of a lot of nonprofits, through the work of corporations and whatever, supporting the efforts, we're never going to get on the other side. So it's going to take more leaders like yourself and others to be singing from that same songbook for us to dig in and do the heavy lifting and continue along this journey and this road of eradicating inequities. And I think we want to, and we have the desire, but it's going to require lots more conversation. So I want to thank you for your voice and acknowledging where we have some soft spots.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. And I think the point that she said that, it's going to take all kinds of leaders, and we're all a leader. It doesn't have to be the CEO or the president. Each of us have a leadership role, either within our families, our sectors, our community. So, take the reins, do it, take some action.
Speaking of leadership, I want to get into the question that I'm seeing often in the chat, and I certainly have had these feelings myself. You know, when you do look at some of the things that were in the legislature or in the policy arena related to women's rights, related to guns, related to violence, related to LGBTQ populations, racial inequities, all of the things that we've seen. And yet we want to be this welcoming community, and we want to celebrate our successes, and we want to draw people in. What role do our organizations play in addressing that and speaking up against it? And so I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, because it is a challenging time.
I'll go first. I think it's a great question, and yeah, absolutely. Having a welcoming state is absolutely critical for attracting and retaining top talent. I think the one thing I would just I think we all need to think about too is, sort of every year. I mean, I've been around, legislative work for many, many years. I know many of you have as well too, and it's important to also, every year that I've been around, there's always been some legislation that's been introduced that obviously a lot of people don't like. So I think it's important to distinguish between what's been introduced and what's been passed, because there's been a lot that's been introduced. It's very troubling, and there's been a ton of work that's been done by the partnership, the Chamber Alliance, lots of business organizations behind the scenes to kill a lot of this stuff.
Well, and Jay, I think that's important, because people
that's important to know
behind the scenes, and so
right.
It helps to hear that.
Yeah, but I think that it's really important. I mean, every issue's got different strategies, different coalitions. I mean, we've worked very closely, for example, with Iowa, with the NAACP, lots of issue by issue in terms of what's the best sort of strategy. So there's a reason why most of this stuff hasn't passed, and likely hopefully won't pass, right? And so just because you don't see, perhaps me, or anyone else that wants to, start social media fights on this stuff, doesn't mean, because sometimes that's not the best strategy. So there's a lot of strategy that goes behind each of these issues. And so in terms of, bills that are introduced, sometimes they do create bad stories, yes. But ultimately, the question has to be what passes and what doesn't pass, because if it never becomes law, then quite frankly, those of us who have been working to kill stuff, that we came out on the right side of these issues. So again, I think it's a really great question, and it's a tough question, and it's I spent a lot of time talking with my colleagues across the country. This is happening, in states, quite frankly, all across the country, and so I guess my call to action to all of you is that if these issues are important to you, are you emailing your legislators? Are you talking about it? Or what strategies are all of you doing as well? Because I do think that issue by issue, there is a lot of work that's been going on to make sure that this stuff does not become law. And as I look at whether it's United Way we partner with on some issues, and whether it's Community Foundation or again, I mentioned a lot of other groups too, that it's all about sort of coalitions and what can you do to share with why these are damaging, and what we do to stop any of this stuff from happening. And if some other states, if you look around, there's been some tough stuff that's passed, and we've been successful in killing a lot of this stuff. And we need to continue to be vigilant. But again, I guess my point, Christy, is just because there's a lot to each issue, and there's different strategies for each issue and different coalitions.
Well, Jay, I'd like to say I appreciate the work that you are saying you guys have done behind the scenes, a lot of stuff that we don't know about. I think it certainly helps educate the public that there are voices being shared with the folks that are creating rules and laws that govern a lot of things. And so I think there are a number of folks that feel like collective voice, and hearing how folks of influence and power in this organization feels about certain things. Sometimes that's affirming to know that we've got foot soldiers on the ground saying, this is not good for our city. This is not good for our state. This is not good to recruit business. It's not good to attract young and folks to our city, and all those kinds of issues. So thank you for work that you're doing behind the scenes. It's helpful to know because there just is chatter around where is the collective voice on a lot of these issues that impact the everyday work that we do in nonprofits and the work that you do on behalf of the community.
Excellent.
So I understand it's a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, thanks for
Right.
the conversation.
I would just add too, right? There's also a lot of common ground issues that we're working on at the same time, right? So there's big issues going forward with childcare. There's big issues going forward with housing. There's big issues going forward with broadband and placemaking, right? So I mean, it's there. So there's a lot of moving parts, right? Because again, we're trying to get these big issues that we found some good common ground on that we're going to need some support on that are going to have huge impact as well. So that sort of the delicacy of pushing through and getting through the proactive things that are going to have high impact at the same time, killing the stuff that's going to be detrimental.
Getting some questions about how best or what tips do we have to actively go about recruiting diverse talent for our staff teams, for our boards of directors, et cetera. I know that that's something that we all on this panel put a lot of intention toward. Do you have a few quick tips that you've found to be successful within your organizations?
I certainly, can start off and understand that is a need. I mean, there are calls that I get all the time, folks looking for diversity and inclusion and trying to diversify their boards. And so I appreciate the calls because I try to make as many referrals as I can. But once you start to build your pipeline, then they'll start making referrals. But just reaching beyond the obvious. Sometimes we just kind of stay in our bubble.
Yeah.
We just kind of say, let me just go to this one person. I think you got to go out there. You got to network. You got to be with people that are different than yourselves. You got to not keep going to your same common source. You got to ask the true question. Am I just pulling someone in because it's this comfortable, obvious choice, or I am really going out there and strategizing on other voices that I've never even heard before and sitting down and saying, tell me who you know and what is your interest and what is your passion? You have to do the work. You have to really get out there and have those conversations and network beyond just the folks that are in your inner circle.
I fully agree, Renee. And I think that does take intention and it takes time, but it pays off in spades, right? So it is the right thing to do, to be not just posting it on LinkedIn, but to be out there having conversations and sharing the opportunity, and don't have necessarily a 2-week timeline. Take the time that it takes to make those outreaches. Any other comment there?
I think this is one of the great lessons of 2020 also, is just the time that it does take to recruit the right person. And I think we've learned through partnerships with our corporate partners that they have individuals within their companies that they want to elevate to leadership roles too. So working, and many of our larger companies here in Central Iowa have employee resource groups that are very well organized. Also, our faith community has so many leaders that we can look to, and we often don't think to reach out to them. And then looking at the leadership within the Divine Nine sororities and fraternities in our community, we have amazingly strong African-American sororities and fraternities. And they're active. Saturday when we had our clinic, they were all there helping to support. So just look to unique ways of recruiting. And I would agree with Renee, not the same people we always go after.
Yeah, there is. I just looked at the list of all the wonderful African Americans that are in the cohort this year for the African American Leadership Institute. Phenomenal individuals that would make phenomenal board members as learning and growing and gaining more leadership through the experience they're going to get there. So it's there. We just have to get beyond our comfort zones and get beyond our 4 walls and start engaging in lots of good conversations.
That's right. And look at who's on your nominating committee as well for the board, and make sure that there are diverse voices there.
Yeah. And Christy, I'll say that this is the analysis that should not just happen with nonprofits. It should be happening in corporations,
100%.
organizations. for-profit organizations should be going through the same exercise that people are wanting our nonprofits to do. So
I agree 100%. Sally, I've got one specific to arts and culture here. How can we as a community continue to support the arts until that lead time is up and the shows are back?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There are several things that you can do. First and foremost, money still matters. We are still bridging a gap. Earned, I don't know if it's unique to the cultural sector, but on March the 17th of 2020, 100% of earned revenue turned off. It wasn't a trickle, 100% of earned revenue turned off for our cultural organizations. And that faucet hasn't turned back on again. So resources are certainly a piece of it. I think another significant, and participation, right? So buy a ticket to a virtual performance. Very, very few of the cultural organizations in Des Moines went dark. The vast majority of the organizations that Bravo funds were still producing and still creating. Their commitment to mission is so deep that they were activating in so many new and innovative and creative ways. So I would encourage everyone to explore what is available still in the virtual environment. We currently are funding 65 cultural organizations in Greater Des Moines. My bet is most of the people on this call are not aware of the majority of those organizations. So go to our website. We have, under our list of grantees, we have links to every single organization's website. Find something new. Learn something new. If you love music, there are a dozen music-related organizations in our community. If you love theater, there are 11 local theater companies that are producing in our community. So find something new to engage with. The second piece I would say is please make sure that you advocate for arts and culture as part of community-based solutions to coming out of this. So often still arts and culture are perceived as nice to have amenities, like, oh, that's so great that we have a world-class art center in our community, or oh, that's so great we have a world-class performing arts center here. We need to remember that not only are these adding tremendous quality of life, they are significant economic engines. And I'm telling you, there is nothing that is going to bring this community back together faster and rebuild community faster than getting our arts and culture sector open. Opportunities to get people together, to celebrate, to share experiences. This is the catalytic sector that's going to bring our community back together. So those are some of my initial ideas. We also have a slide deck on our website called Let's Hear It for the Arts, and there are some specific advocacy messages in there I'd encourage everyone to take a look at.
Well said. Thank you, Sally. All right, I want to be respectful of time and ending on time. And I've got one final question for each of you to reflect on. I'd like to know, what is one thing that inspired you or moved you about our community in the last year? And what is one thing you are most looking forward to throughout the next year for Greater Des Moines? And I'll let you pop in when you're ready. How's that? One thing that moved or inspired you, and one thing you're really looking forward to in the next year for our community.
Well, I'll go because mine is consistent with what I've been saying all along. I've been so incredibly inspired by the creativity of our community overall, but in particular, our cultural sector. Very few said we can't do anything. Everyone was creative and came up with new ways. And even if they couldn't produce, they did back end things that they wouldn't have the opportunity to do if audiences were in the building. So I think that's a stunning level of creativity in our community that needs to be recognized. And the thing I'm most looking forward to is getting back together, whether it's for a music festival or an art festival or an art exhibit. Art is something that is amplified for me by being able to experience it with community. And I can't wait to get back together with all of you to experience culture and heritage and arts in our community.
Me neither.
I'll go next. I'll just say that one of the things that I'm most proud of is how resilient we have been as a community and how we have so pulled together to help each other and how we have had such deep concern about elevating a plethora of missions that are going on that are trying to provide safety for our families and food for our families and dealing with mental health issues and dealing with the learning gap, all of those kinds of things. So I'm really most proud of that. And I do have to do a shameless plug. I'm so proud of my bigs that have stepped to really fill in that gap to help close to 600 kids still be excited about going to school. So I have to add that in there. But one thing I look forward to the most is that we hopefully going to, as we have more of COVID in our rearview mirror, be able to gather together and to break bread with one another and to celebrate the way we normally. This has been an events community, okay?
Yeah.
Miss Bravo, Sally, and we miss all the kinds of things that we do when we connect with people in this community. So I'm looking forward to that slowly happening and that some sense of normalcy will arrive. And then I'm hoping that this sense of humanity for all of us, will be amplified by our hearts moving all in the right direction to deal with all of us having a fair chance and open access to all that matters to all of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
I guess I'd say I'm most proud and so amazed by the team at United Way. I mean, we have been running. And, 211, our call volume has gone through the roof. Also so proud of the whole nonprofit sector. Everyone has pivoted and put their mission forward in so many unique ways. I'm also proud of the 21-day equity challenge that our community came together around. Our goal was 10,000 people coming together to learn and grow. Over 30,000 took the challenge together, and over 500 organizations endorsed the challenge. I'm looking forward to just going to lunch with all of you guys and all of my friends and family and just seeing everybody, getting a good hug. I miss everybody.
Thank you. Jay?
Well, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but I'm most proud of this community for continuing to invest in itself during very challenging times and to lean into the future, right? I mean, again, I can't stress that enough, right? With this amazing list of transformational projects that collectively so many of you who are on this call have been championing. And again, the largest skate park in the country, USL Pro Iowa Soccer Stadium, Central Iowa Water Trails, 150 miles of water trails, transload facility, transformation of Merle Hay Mall and a new hockey arena, a new stadium at Drake, Recplex, all these things. It's amazing what's happened. And again, during very challenging time, a new airport terminal. And so as we lean into that future, it's really going to pay big dividends, and we didn't let very challenges stop us. And I think that's something that we're going to be very proud of for a long time to come. And just in terms of what I'm really looking forward to, lots and lots of live music and live theater and festivals, and just all these things that make our community so great. And really looking forward to all that and being able to spend more time with all of you in person.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your time today and your insightful comments and discussion. I'm so grateful to have walked alongside all of you over this last year. When I think about what has moved and inspired me, I look at the camera because I'm looking beyond the panel. I'm looking at all of you. This community has just been incredible. And we like to say at the Community Foundation, we're simply better together. And that has certainly played out over this last year. So thank you for being here today. I'll turn it back over to Sarah Reichart for just a couple of closing comments.
Thanks, Christy. Wow, what a panel today. As I close, I'd like to lift up givedsm.org. This is our community's online resource to connect donors with timely needs of our nonprofit community. You can support the projects listed on givedsm.org by credit card or by recommending a grant directly from your donor advised fund here at the Community Foundation. Another save the date, we will have our next DonorConnect on April 28th. Same time, 11 to 12. And this will actually be our nonprofit leaders coming together to talk, much like our community leaders today, about the impact of the pandemic and moving forward into the years to come. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for our panelists for their time and their insight. And thank you all again. Have a great day.